just about time, I think. So let's get going. Hi, everyone. I am Kate Zeitfogel. I am marketing specialist at Cadre here. CadreTalk was developed as an opportunity for you to grab a drink and take a short break out of your day. Our goal is to give everyone within the meetings and events industry an opportunity to learn something new, even if it's just one takeaway as we all re-engage in our industry. So mark your calendars, Thursdays at 2 Eastern, because we'll be right here having a 30-minute conversation with an industry expert. Before we get started, let me share a little bit about who we are. Cadre is a marketplace connecting clients and freelancers in an easy-to-use, compliant online platform. Whether you need on-site staffing, virtual meeting assistance, or help with meeting and events project work, bottom line is Cadre is your source to find that talent both affordably and compliantly. And if you're a gig worker in our industry, this is your go-to place to find work. If you are looking for long-term placement, our partner Meeting Jobs offers an industry-specific job board, as well as services in retained search and resume pre-qualification services for the events and meetings industry. Together, Cadre and Meeting Jobs provide a full complement of labor resources across the hiring spectrum, for full-time planners to project-based contract planners to on-site event staff. For more, please visit us at hirecadre.com and at meetingjobs.com. A few housekeeping notes. We are live streaming today's event via YouTube, so for those who aren't able to join us in our webinar, thanks for joining us over on YouTube. For those that are here in the webinar with us, you are automatically muted and your camera is turned off, so there's no need to switch out of your sweats, but please send your questions over to us via the Q&A section. We don't want them getting lost in our chat area. Lastly, mark your calendars for next Thursday. Dawn will be chatting with David Landgraf of Make It Happen Management about our new world of events, as well as touching on the newest social media platform, Clubhouse, which is exciting. I'm not sure what Clubhouse is, so I'll make sure to check out that one. Today, though, I am absolutely honored to be joined by Dr. Elizabeth Lombardo. Dr. E is considered the head coach of happiness for NBA star Shaquille O'Neal and America's most interviewed celebrity psychologist, appearing on more than 100 radio and television shows. You may have seen her on Good Morning America, The Dr. Oz Show, The Today Show, CNN, and Fox Business News. I'd also like to give an extra loud shout out and thank you to Garrett Speakers International for sponsoring today's Cadre Talk. Welcome, Dr. E, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been kind of a crazy day, so I'm really grateful to be here. And yes, a special shout out to Betty Garrett for sponsoring this.
She's wonderful. And I think that you mentioned it right away. It's been a crazy day. Which has followed an absolutely crazy year. And the name of today's show is Staying Sane in Times of Insanity. So let's start with the why. Why is it so important to actually stay sane during these crazy times?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, what goes on up here impacts everything that goes on out there, right? Anything that goes on in our minds really controls how we interact with the world. And it's really important to realize that while we can't control what goes on out here, we can always control what goes on in here. And so even during times when it's very unpredictable, when there's a lot of uncertainty, there is actually a lot that we can do and that we want to do to help not only with our mental health, but our physical health and our relationships and our work. So, when you think of this, it makes me think of an experience I had when I was doing my postdoctoral training at, I was at Parkland Hospital, a big medical center in Dallas, Texas, trauma unit. It's actually where Kennedy was brought when he was shot many decades ago. But my role and consultation liaison at Parkland Hospital was to help people who were dealing with trauma. And I don't mean like I was dealing with the blood and everything, but psychologically, if someone had an accident or if something, experienced a trauma, it was my role to go in and help them out. And I'll never forget a particular gentleman. We'll call him Roger just to give him a name. And Roger was an electrician. He was an electrician who was working on a wire that was supposed to be turned off. Unfortunately for Roger, it was quite active. And so when he touched that wire, a volt of current went through his entire body and burned him so severely that the doctors gave his wife the following option. We can let him die, or we can surgically amputate his arms and try to save his life. not, certainly not anything you would ever want to hear. And so they decided to surgically amputate his arms. And I remember getting the consult of going to help Roger and thinking, oh, what am I gonna do? Right? How am I gonna help this guy? Right? Obviously he's feeling helpless and hopeless and worthless. He has no arms. Like, he can't work anymore. How am I gonna help him? Now, in complete transparency, that's not really what you want your shrink to think when she's coming to see you, but this is early in my career. So I remember, knocking on his door. I had my white lab coat on and I had my clipboard, trying to look all official. And when I opened the door, there was Roger. And Roger was seated, but even seated, you could tell he was tall, 6'3", 6'4", dark brown hair, dark bushy mustache, that hospital gown, grayish blue that no one looks good in, no arms, and he had a big smile on his face. And I remember thinking, wow, so not only is he helpless and hopeless and worthless, but he's delusional. But he wasn't delusional, right? Roger didn't think his arms were going to grow back. He was very aware of the situation. What was different, however, was what was going on up here. Because whereas some people might be thinking, my arms are gone, my life is not worth living, or whatever they might be thinking, Roger's mindset was completely different. Roger was in a complete state of gratitude for still being alive. And he was so focused on how much gratitude he felt to be alive and his conviction that he had been left on this earth for a specific reason. He didn't know what it was, but he was in the state of passion and excitement to figure it out. And because of that mindset, everything else changed, right? First of all, we know that when we have a mindset like that, that helps us combat stress. And when our body is not as stressed, we can actually heal quicker. He healed a lot quicker than any of the doctors ever imagined, got out of the acute care hospital, went to the rehab hospital. I kept following him because I'm like, is this going to last? Yes, it did. It helped him with his rehab in terms of, really moving forward and overcoming significant obstacles, but with the mindset of, yes, I don't have my arms, and what can I do? How can I make this better? And I love sharing that story because I think it's so important that regardless of what's going on in our lives, and a lot of people watching are going through a lot. We're not minimizing that. We are saying that regardless of what's going on, there's a lot that we can do within ourselves to make things better.
That's such an incredible story. It really is. And it definitely points out how important that mindset is, but without just saying change your mindset, because I don't know how to do that. So how do we stay sane and how do we change that mindset?
Right. Just think happy thoughts, right? Just believe in yourself. If that worked, then we'd all be great. And I'd be happily out of a job. I always say my goal is to help everyone so that they don't need me. How do we do that? Well, first to realize that it really is what we're saying to ourselves, right? And it's not external circumstances. And understanding that in order to change our thoughts are just, if you think about it, our thoughts are just nerves firing in a certain pattern, right? Mm-hmm. So thought A, the nerves are firing in your brain in a certain pattern. Thought B, they're firing in this pattern. The more, there's a saying in neuroscience, nerves that fire together, wire together. The more you have a thought, the more that pathway becomes solidified, right? It's the same thing with our behaviors in terms of our actions. Think about the first time you got behind the wheel of a car to drive, right? If you're anything like me, you're like, oh, where do my hands go, right? Like, how much do I turn the steering wheel? I have a 16-year-old, and when I was teaching her how to drive, the first question she had was, Mom, which one's the brake? Right? Oh, excellent piece of information to have when learning how to drive. And it's awkward and it's weird. But now my guess is when you get behind the wheel of a car to drive, you aren't thinking, oh my gosh, how much pressure do I put on the accelerator? You might be thinking about, having the conversation with someone who's in your Bluetooth, or where you're going to go get a snack on your way to your next appointment. Why is that? Because you've literally rewired your brain. And so the way that I help people change their mindset is something I call NRT, neuroregenerative training, but it's literally rewiring your brain. So if you think about, if I say the words ABC to you, or the letters ABC to you, you might start singing the alphabet song in your head. Why? Because it's so ingrained in you. But here's the thing. You did not come out of your mama's womb singing
it. Sure.
Okay? That has been wired in your brain. Same thing when it comes to belief in ourselves or belief in the world. If we've developed this belief of life is hard, it's never going to get better, that's learned. And anything learned can be unlearned and relearned. And that's really the beauty of this. My grandmother, she was a psychiatric nurse by training.
Wow.
We're all a little kooky in mental health, if you ask me. But anyway, she was also a fabulous piano player. And she taught a course at the college level, even though she never graduated from university. She taught a course that she called How to Play the Piano Despite Years of Practice. Think about that. How to play the piano despite years of practice. So what she'd do is she'd take her students and she would watch them play, and she'd get rid of the habits that didn't work. Right? Maybe where their hands were placed, or I don't play the piano. Yeah. She would teach them the skills that were correct, and then they would practice. And if you get rid of what doesn't work, right, you learn what is effective and you practice that, you cannot help but get better. So I always think of, I help people be happy despite years of practice, because I think a lot of times people have developed habits that don't really work. Maybe it's, trying to make more money, or putting their worth and their happiness into their, working more hours. Ben and Jerry's therapy, right? Eating maybe. So we've developed some habits that maybe aren't so helpful. Getting rid of those, learning the skills that are, and science tells us exactly what can make us happy, and practicing those. And when that happens, you literally cannot help but be happier.
It's just like breaking a bad habit, kind of like that Ben and Jerry's therapy that you were just talking about, except this one's in my brain. So instead of stopping myself from eating that extra bowl of ice cream, it's finding those ways to stop that mindset and change it again. And I know that in today's description, you had mentioned a red zone. And in my mind, a red zone, it refers to football, but I'm sure that's not what you were talking about here. So what does it mean to be in that red zone?
Yeah. So although I do sports psychology, that is not what we're talking about. So the red zone, when I'm talking about this, is an emotional red zone. Okay. If you think of distress, and in psychology, distress is a catch-all term for pretty much any emotion you don't want. It could be sadness, frustration, anger, worry, guilt, shame, hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness. It all goes in the distress pile. And distress is not an all or nothing. It's really a continuum from 0 to 10. So 0 distress is no distress at all. You just got off the massage table. Life is great, right? 10 out of 10 is overwhelmed with distress. So if you're feeling anger, for example, you might be yelling, or the proverbial steam coming out of your ears. Mm-hmm. Hopefully you don't spend a whole lot of time at 10, and you're probably not at 0 a whole lot either. So just asking yourself right now, kind of like, where am I right now? Or what's been my average for the past week, and starting to become aware of what your level of distress is. And here's the thing, it fluctuates. It fluctuates throughout the day according to maybe who you're with, mother-in-law, what you're doing, right? If you have a really challenging task, or if you're watching the news, that can increase our distress. Our physiology, right? You heard of being hangry? Yep. Ever been hangry? Yeah, right. So when we're hungry, we're angry. Yep. And that gets up into the higher level. So I call the red zone a 7 out of 10 or higher in terms of that distress. And the thing about being in the red zone is our brain actually functions differently than when we're at lower levels. So when we're in the green zone, 0, 1, 2, 3, you're using more of your frontal lobe, right? That structure that differentiates you from other animals. Allows you to engage in executive functioning, problem solving, perspective taking, right? When we're in the green zone, we're like, yeah, okay, this pandemic is tough, but I got it, right? I can handle this. When we're in the green zone and a loved one does something, we're like, it's just who they are. As we go up on the scale, however, our perspective goes from broad to narrow, so that when we get into the red zone, we focus almost exclusively on the negatives, on what is wrong. When we get into the red zone, we feel like we're stuck. We feel like a victim of our circumstances. We tend to blame others and feel like there's nothing that we can do. When we're in the red zone, that thing that your loved one did in the green zone, you're like, not a big deal. They can do the same thing when you're in the red zone, right? And you have a different reaction.
It becomes a huge problem.
Right? Yeah. And especially, with this pandemic and all this together time, I would say I married you for dinner, not breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But when we're in the red zone, there's a biological change that occurs in our brain. So instead of that frontal lobe really being in charge, our limbic system, that emotional reasoning hijacks our rational thinking. And that's why we tend to see things in a more negative way. That's why we tend to interpret things in that more survival mode. And in fact, I always tell my coaching clients, if you are in the red zone, right, don't let anything out of your mouth, because that's when we say things we later regret. Sure. And don't put anything in your mouth, because that's when we consume things we later regret.
That's wonderful advice. Taking it that extra step to don't put anything into your mouth. That's so helpful, especially for people like me love food therapy. And I think that so many, especially in our industry, being out of work, this pandemic leaving us feeling afraid and like you were saying, stuck. So if we are able to identify ourselves as being in that red zone and just feeling as though there's no way out, I'm sure there is, but how do we pull ourselves out of that feeling?
Yeah, yeah. And, again, when we're in the red zone, we tend to think more negatively, which causes us to have more, helplessness, which causes us to feel like we're stuck, and it becomes this downward spiral. Yeah. So I would say, regardless of what's going on, right, there are always two ways to handle a problem. So think, for example, if you're stuck in an elevator, right? You're on the 11th floor, you're stuck in an elevator, you start maybe feeling anxious or worried because of it. What can you do? Mm-hmm. There are always two ways, strategies to dealing with a problem. One is problem focused, change the problem itself. That tends to be what people focus on when they try to solve problems. So if I'm stuck in an elevator and I'm freaking out, I might call 911 or hit the alarm button. Mm-hmm. But there's also a whole other set of strategy with tactics in it, which is emotion-focused coping, which means changing your emotional reaction to what's going on. So if I'm stuck in an elevator, for example, we might take some deep breaths, right? You might call a friend to distract you. You might watch a video. And that helps you get out of the red zone, which one, feels better, but two, also allows you to problem solve, to really use that frontal lobe. And I'll just briefly share how I apply this, have applied this in my life. So I mentioned today is the 26th dating anniversary of my husband. My husband and I have been together for over half my life. Very happy about that. 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with ALS, which is a horrible disease, a fatal disorder. Prognosis is 3 to 5 years. So we're already beating that. You can imagine getting this diagnosis. Now, my husband and I met at the gym. So like we were the ones who would, work out together. It was really great dating someone at the gym because we worked out every day because we couldn't wait to see each other. But anyway, so when we first got this diagnosis, it was shock, right? We were in the red zone. Oh my gosh. The doctor at the Mayo Clinic literally looked at me and said, go home to prepare 6 years ago. Like there's nothing you can do, honey. So once we got ourselves out of the red zone, right, it kind of said, okay, we asked ourselves this question. And one great question to ask yourself when you're in the red zone is this: what can I do? What can I do? Because we're focused on what we can't do. So for us, we asked, what can I do? And that led us to, we worked with many, many specialists. He had foot drop at the time, which is when he couldn't, his foot would drop. He couldn't lift up his toes while he was walking. 10 months, I gave him 6 IV antibiotics. That was gone. Right. So I was literally having the conversation with Oprah about how we had overcome ALS. Unfortunately, things have gotten worse for the past 4 years. He's been on a ventilator. So he's trached on a ventilator, feeding tube, completely paralyzed, really can barely even speak now. He's nearing the end of his life. Obviously, it's upsetting. Even with that, though, we still ask the question, what can we do? So maybe now problem focused, we can't change the disease itself, but emotion focused, we have, my husband and I, we have 2 children, as a family, we can really focus on what can we do? We can spend time together. We can reminisce about funny times. He's been reading his old yearbook. Oh my goodness. She was like, hey, Jeff, really love spending time with you. And my daughters are reading it out loud and they're like, Dad, who is Laura? And he can't speak. So he has this eye gaze board where he spells things out and then hits the microphone and he'll say things like, I was a stud. So during this horribly challenging time, when we focus on that emotion focused coping, this isn't exactly how we wanted things to happen, but we still can have joy. We still can appreciate those moments. And so for everyone watching, I hope and pray you are not going through this. Having said that, you're going through your own stresses. So you want to say, okay, what can I do problem focus wise? So problem focus wise, maybe it's, networking more, right? Maybe it's putting your resume out. Maybe it's having, conversations, with people like you. So really looking at the problem focus, but don't underestimate the emotion focused coping, the getting yourself out of the red zone. How do you do that? One of the best ways to do it is to move. And I don't mean change, residential locations. I mean, move your body. Literally going for a walk, jumping on the bed, doing 2 minutes of push-ups, sit-ups, squats. it sounds so simple, but what happens is there are biochemical changes that occur when you exert yourself, when you engage in exercise, that help you get out of the red zone. When you do things like that, not only does it feel better, but again, then you can use that frontal lobe to say, okay, what can I do? I'm not stuck. I'm never helpless. What can I do?
That is absolutely fantastic. And I know that exercise helps me get out of that red zone for sure. So I definitely appreciate that tip and having it reaffirmed for me as well. And thank you so much for sharing about your at-home experience too. I think that that's so important for the rest of us to be able to connect and know that you're not just preaching, you're walking the walk and talking the talk as well.
I practice this on a daily basis.
Yes.
Indeed.
ALS absolutely is not an easy disease, but 6 years, that's amazing. So amongst other things, you are a keynote speaker. And during those keynotes, you're frequently discussing crushing your inner critic. And it's one of your boot camp programs. And I imagine that, at least for me, my inner critic can also help elevate me into my red zone, and it just gets worse when I'm in my red zone. So can you give us a few tips on successfully crushing our personal inner critic?
Yeah, and here's the thing, we all have an inner critic, right? That little voice inside of us that says, hey, you're a failure, you totally messed up, I can't believe you said that. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's louder. And if you think of that continuum again, when you're in the green zone, usually we can kind of control that inner critic. It creeps up, oh, I can't believe you said that. It's okay, I'm human. When we're in the red zone, it gets really loud, right? And then again, the inner critic causes more distress, which causes our inner critic to get louder, and it becomes this downward spiral. One of the ways to crush your inner critic is to consider what I call sergeant versus cheerleader, right? So if I worked at West Point Military Academy for a little bit, and there are drill sergeants there. And what does a drill sergeant do? A drill sergeant yells at you, puts you down. Why? Because ultimately the drill sergeant wants you to be so good at what you do that you will excel when you are in combat. That's the goal of the drill sergeant, but the drill sergeant doesn't do it in a very nice way. Then you have the cheerleader. The cheerleader's like, you got this, you got this, you got this. Why? Because the cheerleader wants you to succeed. So if you consider your inner critic being a drill sergeant, what does it really want from you? It doesn't want to put you down. It wants something positive for you. If you walk by the mirror and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you look like that. What your inner critic really wants is for you to be healthy, right? If you look at your bank account and see not as many zeros as you'd like, right? Instead of putting you down, you're a failure. What the goal of that drill sergeant is actually to motivate you. Hey, let's take some steps to do something positive for yourself. So if you could literally retranslate what your inner critic is from the drill sergeant approach to hearing the cheerleader approach, or ultimately what your inner critic wants, that can be really helpful. And one way to do that is what I call BFA. Best friend advice. So if you jot down, it's better if you write down what your inner critic is saying. You jot down what your inner critic is saying, and then you look at it. Totally messed up, you're a total failure. If your best friend came to you saying what your inner critic is saying to you, what would be your reaction? Would it be, you know what? You are a failure. And not just this time. Let me tell you about the 3 other times you really messed up. Yeah. You would never say that to your best friend, right? You'd be like, hey, okay, yeah, you didn't do so well here, but remember all these other times you were successful. Hey, we can learn from this. We can grow from this. We can use this to become even better. That's probably what you would say to your best friend. So when you look at what your inner critic is saying to you, use BFA, best friend advice. How would you respond if your best friend said that? And it really does help give you a different perspective.
That's beautiful. And it helps you take yourself out of that situation as well, to help de-escalate your own inner critic issue. I think that's wonderful. And one of the questions that just popped up in our Q&A was, do you have any other suggestions if you are in that red zone to come out of it? You mentioned exercise. Are there any other suggestions aside from,
like a gazillion of them? Yeah, definitely. So a couple of things that can be really helpful. Music is another thing that often people listen to. I actually have my clients have a get out of the red zone playlist, and it may be lyrics that they like. It may be an upbeat, tempo. It may be a song that reminds them of a more positive time. So music can be helpful. Connecting with others, being with people who you love and care about can be very helpful. Nature. Research shows that not just being in nature can help us, but even looking at pictures of nature. I live in Chicago. We live in Chicago, right? So it's a little cold some winters, but even looking at nature can help decrease that. Engaging in a hobby, doing something that's fun for you, right? Laughter. Literally, sometimes when I'm in the red zone, I just hop on YouTube. There are a couple comedians who I find quite funny, and I watch a 3-minute video. That laughter helps get out of the red zone, and then you can start to deal with life differently.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate that, because sometimes you can't just get up and do some jumping jacks to shake things off. So those extra suggestions are great. We've got 3 minutes, 2 minutes left or so. Let me squeeze in another question or two before letting you go. I know that on your website, elizabethlombardo.com, that you talk about finding true success. What does that mean? And just for everyone out there, a little bird told me that you've got a book series coming out with that same name. So tell me a little bit more about it. Give us a little peek.
Yeah. So true success is something that I've kind of, came up with after working with clients for, I used to say over 2 decades, but let's go to 2.5 decades really. And it's really based on the notion that how society defines success, looking a certain way, making a certain amount of money, that doesn't actually bring true success, right? I work with clients one-on-one. They tend to be very successful on paper, and yet they say to me, Dr. E, is this as good as it gets? Yeah. So true success, I've determined, is really 3 ingredients. It's passion, it's purpose, and it's people. Passion is positive energy even during difficult times, like during what we're going through right now. How can you be in a state of gratitude, but also be in a state of enthusiasm to make things better? Purpose means meaning, right? Having fulfillment. And it is human nature to want to have meaning in our life. So how can you do that? And then people, we're social beings, right? So how can you optimize those relationships, whether it's personal relationships, professional relationships? So yeah, so that's true success. And so we have 3 books coming out. The first one is Get Out of the Red Zone, which is a lot more information on what we talked about and how to get out of the red zone so that you can be the person that you want to be.
Beautiful. That is the perfect timing also, because we are at 1:30 our time, Chicago time. So Dr. E, thank you for your time this afternoon. It's been great getting all these snippets to help us all find true success. I want to also thank once again Garrett Speakers International for sponsoring today's Cadre Talk. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Make sure that you've got on your calendar. Again, there's my alarm. It is 1:30. I hope to see you all again next week. Dr. E, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Have a great day, everyone.